Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's great to be with you here today on this cold Melbourne night. Thanks for coming tonight. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. Since we're talking about history tonight, it's good to acknowledge the past history of Australia as it belonged to the Aboriginal people. Unfortunately, when you look at the history, what you see is migrations, wars, invasion, conquests, and all of these things have happened over the history. But one thing that I have noticed when I look at the Islamic history is that even though Muslims have conquered lands and traveled to many geographies, they have never wiped out indigenous people of the land. They have always built those lands and nurtured those people, and that's what we see the legacy of Muslims around the world in history. And one of which is today is the Ottoman Empire that we're going to talk about. Okay, I'll get my slides up first. I thought it was here. Yeah, the interest on Ottoman Empire has heightened with recent historical drama series that originate from Turkey, and they're sold around the Muslim world and they've become very popular. And one of them is the Dirilish, which means revival in Turkish. It depicts the beginning of the Ottoman Empire, particularly Ertuğrul Bey, who is the father of Osman Bey, and Osman Bey is the real founder of Ottoman Empire, and the empire is named after Osman Bey. So that is, a lot of people have asked me about various aspects of Ottoman Empire because they're watching the series, and I thought it was a good idea, since there is so much interest in the series and Ottoman Empire, that I should do some lectures on it. And then I have done this lecture in Sydney, and now we are here in Melbourne, so I'm really happy to cover that. Now at the outset, I just want to show you this stone. Would anyone guess what that would be? If you know Ottoman history, don't put your hand up. But isn't that just a stone? It's outside of a mosque in Istanbul. This is known as the Sadaka, or charity stone. They used to have this in front of the mosques in Istanbul, where people dropped zakat or sadaqah money, and the poor people would come and pick it up. Isn't that, just try to do this outside of the mosque today. What's going to happen? No one's going to put money in it, firstly. And secondly, even if you put money, it's going to disappear very quickly. And at that time, so the rich people did not want to make poor people feel inferior by giving them the charity. And also, the poor people had the dignity not to ask for it outwardly, and they would only take enough for them to survive that day. And it just shows you the level of sophistication that Ottoman society achieved in terms of not only Islamic ideals, but also what it means to be live together amongst a society. One of the greatest measures of how a society functions is how rich people behave and how poor people behave. And so Ottomans have done a really great job. Unfortunately, these don't exist in the mosques in Istanbul anymore, and only some of them survived, and it just shows you the present society as well. So one of the reasons why the Dirilish series have become popular is that, one, the heroes are Muslims. You know, we are sick of Muslims being not the antagonists in movies and drama series, and they always get killed, and they're all evil people. And in this particular series, the heroes are Muslim, and they treat everyone nicely. There's a sense of justice, heroism. I think Muslims have missed this kind of having feelings like that with the status of the Muslim world around us. So in a sense, it's a educational series. It's a feel-good drama and entertainment, and it makes us feel good. So let us, Ottomans started up very small as a frontier polity in the outskirts of the Seljuk Empire in the 12th century, and then from that it has become this. It's covered 3 continents in its peak. And although this map doesn't do justice to the size, because when you control North Africa, you basically control half of the continent. And all of that, the coastlines means you control Arabia, and even Poland and up there in the Eastern European countries, Ottoman Empire had relationship with, they paid tribute and things like that. So it was a massive empire. It covered all of Middle East, North Africa, Balkans, and Eastern Europe, Caucasus, and all that. So how did they do it? How was this possible? And given that Ottoman Empire lasted 624 years, it is actually the longest dynastic rule in history. And that is a great success. If you consider, for example, one of the greats of human history is Alexander the Great, who has captured Egypt, Middle East, Iran, went to India, and so on. But when he died, the whole thing crumbled within a few decades, whereas the Ottomans lasted for centuries. And these things don't happen by force, by power alone. You have to have something right. And that's what I'm going to focus today. So Turks come from, obviously Ottoman Empire was initiated or started by Turks, even though the empire has covered a very large, about 40 different large ethnicities. It was run by a Turkish dynasty. So Turks come from Central Asia, and this map shows you how they're spread out today, even across a very large geography. But originally they come from Central Asia. That's why they generally have it's a cross between the Chinese, European, and the subcontinent. So there are certain internal and external factors for the success of the Ottoman Empire, and I'm going to cover those in order. Obviously, one of the things that I get all the time, like for example, when we explain a problem with any Muslim country today, it's always a conspiracy theory comes, it's external powers and all of that. Yes, there are, of course, external powers have certain interests in the Middle East, and then they will want certain policies to be implemented. But it's never an external factors alone. And it's never internal factors alone. It's a combination of the two. It's a bit like how human body functions. If the human body is healthy inside, because it's being bombarded continuously with viruses and microbes, it's going to quickly get sick if the body is not healthy. But sometimes even though the body is healthy, the external factors are so powerful that you cannot defend it. But in general, we deal with the external world outside and we try to get healthy. And for as long as we are healthy inside and have good conditions outside, we lead good lives and we can be happy. So this is also the same with governments or countries, societies and empires. So let's see what they are. I'm going to cover the external factors first, and then I will cover 5 of them. The first one is the conversion of Turks to Islam. Now, obviously, Ottoman Empire was one of a Sharia state. Sharia was very much important. It was a Muslim society. A lot of the communities within it was identified with their religious identity. So religion was very much in the foreground. So conversion to Islam, therefore, is an important element of that. The first time Muslims went to Central Asia was 711. 711 is a key year in the history of Islam. That's when Muslims entered into Andalus first. They would firstly cross Indus River in India, and they also went to Central Asia. It was a second wave of expansion for Muslims. Although Andalus was conquered with 7,000 soldiers, conquering Central Asia was very difficult. Turks have proved themselves to be a formidable adversary. They really resisted quite heavily. And then a lot of for example, when the Sahaba was firstly expanding into Syria or Iraq, they just fought the empire, and once the empire collapsed, the people welcomed Muslims. So with the Turks, there was no empire, and Turks were the indigenous people, so they defended their territory, unlike other people. So this particular aspect of Turks was noticed by early Muslims, so they were taken in and deployed as soldiers very much in the Abbasid era later on. So we always see them as soldiers coming in and fighting for the Caliph, and especially in 8th, 9th century. But largely Turks were still non-Muslim in the Central Asia. So the first time the Oghuz Turks that the Ottomans belonged to, they migrated in 985 to Kazakhstan due to some disputes, and they became converted to Islam in 999 as a whole tribe. And after that conversion, they have become kind of servants of Islam. That soldier kind of a mentality and the nature of Turks remained even within Islam. And in 1055, the grandson of the Oghuz Turks, Tuğrul Bey, reached Baghdad and deposed the Buyids from power. Now the Buyids were a Shiite dynasty. And I'm not, this is a historical fact, and I'm not here being sectarian. I hope you don't get that image. But in about 10th, 11th century, a lot of the dynasties were Shiite based. And only with the Turks, Tuğrul Bey, when they came to Baghdad, they were Sunnis. So the Caliph supported them, and it was a mutually beneficial relationship. So they deposed Buyids from power. So even though you have Caliph at the time, Caliph doesn't have any executive powers. It's more symbolic. And the Caliph gives the title Sultan for the first time to Tuğrul Bey. So they quickly established what we call the Seljuk Empire, and his son Alparslan is an important figure, and he has a vizier called Nizam al-Mulk. Now Nizam al-Mulk is the one who established the Nizamiya Madrasa. So it was really the Seljuks and the Nizam al-Mulk that started the Nizamiya Madrasa system, that Imam Ghazali was a principal, and then that was a very important project. It was an innovative, important project that spread across the Muslim world, and the Turks were a central part of that. A key victory of Alparslan is 1071 in Manzikert, which is the eastern Turkey. And that opened up Anatolia, the present-day Turkey, where it is, to Turks. And also, it has also triggered Crusades. We see here one anecdote. If I just relay one story related to Alparslan, when he fought the Byzantines, he actually captured the emperor as prisoner of war, and then he's speaking to the emperor. He says, "What do you think what would you do if I was in your situation? How would you treat me if I was a captive? He says, I would parade you in Constantinople and then stone you to death. So you would be executed in front of a large crowd. So he says then, what do you think I'm going to do to you? He says, probably the same. He goes, no, I'm letting you free. You can go back to your country. What is the behavior here? This is the prophetic behavior, isn't it? This is exactly how the Prophet, peace be upon him, treated the Meccans when he conquered Mecca. And this is how Salah ad-Din treated the people of Jerusalem. It is the prophetic ethic of how to behave when you're victorious. You behave not to punish, but to, as a show of mercy and forgiveness. So that's the second aspect. The Seljuks conquer Anatolia. So in that way, the Ottoman Empire is going to emerge from Anatolia. So their presence there is important. The third one is the Crusades that happened after that, and the Seljuk defense. So when Crusaders were coming, they came over land. So the first point of contact with Muslims were the Seljuk Turks. So, and they have really defended the Middle East. So in that defense, more Turks have migrated to Anatolia. Obviously, they're declaring jihad, to defend the homeland and the Islamic heartlands. So all these more migration happened into Anatolia. Even though the first crusade went through successfully, but they lost 80% of their soldiers, they captured Jerusalem in the end. So all of that, the presence of Crusaders gives rise to rulers like Nuruddin and Salah ad-Din. Now most people know Salah ad-Din, but not many people know Nuruddin. Salah ad-Din was the progeny of Nuruddin. And Nuruddin is known as a Wali Sultan. He was a very saintly person. And he didn't like warfare. That's why, for example, to capture Damascus, he's trying to, in order to fight the Crusaders, you need unity, you need more soldiers. So getting Damascus was important. It takes him 3 years. He does a bit of a propaganda, relationships, and so he wins people's hearts. In the end, the city is returned to him without a battle. So Nuruddin was a person like that. And so Salah ad-Din rises in that environment, mainly chiefly from Egypt. So that the defense of the Muslim world against crusading forces brought more people, more Turks into Anatolia. And also that created a bit of a kind of a antagonistic temperament between Muslims and Christians. Because when Christians are coming to attack you, so the Christian populations in Anatolia, either they have migrated out or they converted to Islam. I would say that the Turks in Turkey now, if they do an ancestry DNA test, you're not going to have 100% Turks. I'll tell you that. I have done it myself. It came out 12% Greek Italian. I guess somewhere in that Crusader thing they're mixed. Or it was the Romans and the Greeks who converted to Islam and then they mixed with intermarried with Muslims. That's better, like this always happens, people mix, especially Anatolia, it's a mixing pot of all the races. And especially when you look at, Turks have been in, like when I say, obviously this is the history of Turks, but when the Islamic history largely, or Islamic civilization is largely built on 4 main races or ethnicities: the Arab, Turk, Persian, and the Indian Muslim. This largely, yes, there are Muslims from all over the world, but the Islamic civilization is fundamentally based on these 4 race of people. Although people migrated to Turkey or Anatolia, it still wasn't enough. So then comes the Mongol invasion. It starts in 1220. So they began invading Muslim territories, and they wreak havoc across the Muslim world. Like cities like Tashkent, Bukhara, Samarkand, these cities get destroyed. The historians say that they've killed about 1.5 million people at that time. It was really huge numbers. In the end, Islam has a habit of conquering its conquerors. Like Mongols later converted to Islam, but in that time period, in 13th century, so when these Mongol hordes are coming and destroying cities, what happens? What happens today to Syria? You know, people are migrating, running away as refugees. That's exactly what's happened. A lot of the Turks have migrated. Even, for example, Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi, they come from Belkh. They went back into Konya, which is in Anatolia. So Anatolia was the frontier town, cities, or the edge of the Muslim world, so away from the Mongols. In 1258, Baghdad was captured and Abbasid Caliphate ended, and also Seljuk rule ended. That's very significant because the Seljuks ruled the Anatolia as well. So when that's collapsed, when Mongols also collapsed Seljuk rule, it was split into these small principalities, and Ottomans was one of them. So they became independent basically on their own right. But just in that, before we get into that, this is also a very important factor, a solace in Islam within destruction. You know, when there's all these Mongol invasions, Crusades coming in, there's a lot of destruction that's happening. So what gives hope to people, what gives them solace, is religion and spirituality. So this is the time when we see also 12th century, 13th century, the rise of Islamic spirituality. This is where you get like towering figures like Abdul Qadir Jilani, Ibn al-Arabi, Rumi, and many others that came and established spiritual powers. Like Abdul Qadir Jilani had a movement in Central Asia and Khorasan. Mainly, and the movement was about helping poor people, providing services and food. Like most of them is known as, we just know them as a spiritual aspects, but they made services to people as well. So madrasa and spirituality went up, and as the political power waned and went down. And by the way, this is what you see always. There is a book written by Ira Lapidus. It's 850 pages. It's a history of Islamic societies. And there he's got a part about the worldwide diffusion of Islam. And he analyzes how Islam spread across the large geographies. And he says that the mass conversion happened in 10th century when the Central Abbasid rule weakened. For some reason, whenever the political forces are weaker, there's more, religion really grows. Maybe when you have strong leaders or central government, they control everything, or you say, oh, well, he's doing it, we don't have to do anything. But when that collapses, then every scholars especially and the individuals go for action. And in a way, that's what we're seeing now in the Muslim world. You know, all these governments are in shambles, and then you've got all these movements that have originated in much of the Muslim world. So the world was in a new world order, and these were some of the changes are that it was new, a Turkic Mongol political order comes in. You see this everywhere, even in Iran. Iran was Safavids were Turks. The Mongol Empire in India, they were kind of a Turkic dynasty. dynasty, Muhammad Bawur and his sons. There was a change in military technology, the introduction of gunpowder. This was really important, a change. And instead of a very strong caliphate, you had these powerful sultanates that were committed to Islam. And Ottoman Empire was one of the most formidable one of those. What was constant was what didn't change, Islam and its dominance in society, the economy and Muslim dominance in trade, especially Indian Ocean trade. I'm going to touch on that later. And Islamic law, culture, and spirituality as unifying agent for all Muslims. Like wherever you traveled, India or elsewhere, there was a common thread of Islamic culture and religion and identity that unified the people on the ground, even though the rules were different. When you read history books of Muslim historians, sometimes they talk about like two parties fighting for the supremacy, and people in the bazaar shopping at the same time. Like, they almost did not care who was ruling, and they were fighting each other. So Ottomans began as in that particular world, in that new world order, they were the small polity in the outskirts of the westmost outskirts of the Seljuk Empire. And it was one of the smallest ones, by the way. Now, when you have those 12 principalities, what do you think is going to happen? Well, what usually happens when you have this? They fight each other, exactly. And that's what happened. They started fighting each other so that they to gain supremacy. Except the Ottomans. Ottomans never fought those smaller guys. They always went west. That's one of their key success premise. They did not fight other Muslims. Well, again, when I'm using this fight, I'm not gonna promote you guys to go and fight the kuffar, or things like that. We are talking history, right? And in history, this is exactly what happened. And people thought. By the way, in today's world, peace is the nominal international state of affairs. Like you can now buy your tickets and go and travel to a country without a problem, as long as you got a visa and so on. An Australian passport, you can go just about everywhere. But you could not do that in that time, and because warfare was the nominal relationship between countries. So if let's say there was a ruler died, and his son was 12 years old or something, and your neighbor said, okay, that's my chance, I'm just going to go and invade, attack. That's exactly how things happened. So attacking one another was a normal thing to do. And that's exactly what happened with the Ottomans as well. But by the way, even though that is the case, as I shall explain later, whenever there were Christian citizens living on the Ottoman territory, they have looked after their rights as well. So this is a very important aspect of the Ottoman society. So these are the internal factors that are responsible for the rise of Ottoman Empire. Let me go through one of them, one at a time. The first one is leadership dedicated to a sacred vision. The early Ottoman rulers, they did not see them, it wasn't a personal, to be powerful, rich, and have rule over a large territory. They had a vision, and that was what they called Ilahi Kalimatullah, or sanctifying the name of God on earth. So in their view, they thought that by, let's say, a conquest, by the way, the Arabic word for conquest is fat, or futuhat plural. which means opening. So you're not invading or conquering, you're opening land to the message of Islam, basically. And because there's la ikraha fi din, there's no compulsion in religion, and I will come to that a little bit later, you cannot force them. So Ottomans and Muslims, they thought by ruling over a land, people had access to Islam. That's all it was. Without that, you people had no chance of accessing Muslims. There's no internet at that time, there's no TV, there's nothing, no communication. So that was the only way. So, for example, when Sultan Murad was, he wins a battle in Kosovo, and then when he was going through the battlefield, a Serbian soldier stabs him, and he's about to die, and he says to his son, "Attan inmiyorsunuz," which means don't get off your horses. So he's giving his last testament to his son, don't get off your horses. Fatih Sultan Mehmed, the conqueror of Istanbul, he writes to his son, he says, he writes to his mother, he says, do you think this is just a fight and heroism? Because our job is ilaha kalimatullah. That's what we're here for. So you see this in the writings and the poetry of the early Ottoman sultans. They really thought that they were on a sacred duty. And even though that is subjective for a Muslim, a Christian will not like that, for example, but still, it's a vision. It's a vision that unifies people around a common project, which is above the selfish interests of the Sultan and everyone else who's involved. So that's number one. So good leadership dedicated to a sacred vision. And the second point there is the emphasis on education and meritocracy. Now, a lot of people, how would you, if you were to define an Ottoman society or the regime, even the political regime, it wasn't a democracy, but it wasn't a autocracy either. It was a meritocracy, which means the merit comes first. So if you are good, if you have skills and competence and experience, you can rise up all the way to the top. And people should be given best possible opportunity for education. So even though literacy rate, we don't know the literacy rate in Ottoman Empire, but in the cities it was very high, close to 100%. In the rural areas, usually kids went to school, madrasa, and if they did well, they continued. So they received education. But if they didn't do well, they weren't intelligent or they were mucking around too much in class, send them to trade or work in the farms, basically. That's how it worked. So what that means is that if you were intelligent, if you had capability, you could receive education, good education. And that you could rise up. For instance, Sokullu Mehmed Pasha, who was one of the greatest statesmen in all the Ottomans, he was the Wazir al-Azam, or the Prime Minister, let's say, or just under the Sultan. He was from Bosnia, or that part of the world. And, and he doesn't come from any noble family. That's my point. People did not rise according to their noble blood. That was the difference. You have it whereas in Europe, let's say around that time, until French Revolution basically, aristocracy, you can only get jobs, like high jobs, high offices, and commanding armies, and all of that, only if you were in aristocracy. But in the Ottoman Empire, it wasn't the case. There was a school called Enderun, which was in the palace. It was the highest form of education. They studied science, religion, languages, philosophy, everything. But just to let you know, the Fatih Sultan Mehmed, when he conquered Constantinople, he was 21 years old. And they say that he had 6 languages. He knew 6 languages. 21 years old, right? When I was 21, we were just mucking around in the university. And forget about conquering the most formidable cities in the world. So the second, obviously, education meritocracy is not enough. You need rule of law and religious freedoms. But one of the greatest testament reasons why Ottoman Empire lasted for that long is because it was a tolerant society. Even in the Islamic law, there's the dhimmi system, where you have, if you're not a Muslim, you become a citizen, a protected citizen of the country, and nobody could harm you as long as you just function within the society. So your life was guaranteed, your property was guaranteed, and you could practice your religion. Now, Ottomans institutionalized this and took it even further. They called it a millet system. So basically, if you were like Greek Orthodox church, the Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Church was the head of the Greeks. Now the reason, today this may seem absurd a little bit, how do you function like that? But at that time, don't forget, people identified with religion first, before their ethnicity. So the religious officers were the top leaders. So they could have their own education system. They practiced their religions freely. They collected taxes. A certain portion went to the state. So basically, they governed themselves, and it worked really well for a long time. So that's a very important part of the Ottoman success. Otherwise, how do you rule over such a large territory of multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious? And today we define Australia, for example, as multicultural only. And when I say Australia is a multi-faith country, people cringe because they don't want to be identified. Or really, like, nobody wants to be identified as a faith in Australia. Everything is lumped under multiculturalism. So in the Ottoman Empire, it was free. All these things were freely expressed. So it was a pluralistic legal system as well. Again, today, we have a lot of, thankfully, thanks to Australia, we have lots of freedoms in this country. I'm not denying that. But the moment Muslims say, can we have a little bit of Islamic law here and there? Oh, no, Muslims want Sharia, this, that, uproar. Daily Telegraph and other newspapers really make a big fuss out of it. But rule of law is also very important, brothers and sisters. Because without rule of law, the powerful sultan, caliph, whatever you call it, can become a tyrant. The way to prevent that is the law is above everyone. Just to give you one example, Sultan Suleiman, who was probably the most famous and the biggest of the Ottoman sultans and caliphs, when he was on an expedition to Europe, I think he was going on the siege of Vienna, and this is like 250,000 army, all those cannons and everything just going, rumbling along the territory. A farmer's vineyard was damaged. So he complained, and eventually they tried to compensate him. He wasn't happy. And then eventually he said, I want to talk to the Sultan. He comes and he talks to the Sultan. If you don't compensate me properly, I'm going to complain to the higher authority. And Suleiman smiles, because who could be higher than me? Kind of. And he goes, higher than you is Sharia. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, So I'm going to complain to Sharia. Why? Because he could say that because rule of law, or laws were above the rulers. That is very important. And there's a famous incident of Fatih Sultan Mehmed where he wrongfully punishes one of the architects or builders. His hand is chopped, and he sues Fatih Sultan Mehmed. And in the court, the Sultan loses the case. And the punishment is for his hand to be chopped. Again, this chopping of hands may seem a little bit harsh for our time, but once again, these things were normal at that time. In Europe, people were being burned on the stake, and actually the court finds him guilty. And then everyone's panicking, what's going to happen? And then eventually the complainant, she goes, I just wanted to have justice, I've got my justice, I don't want his hand to be chopped, so he gets compensation. On religious freedom and in relation to rule of law, Sultan Selim, who is the father of Sultan Suleiman, and he's the one who brings caliphate to Ottomans. He looks at Europe, it's largely Christian. And he had a bit of a harsh sort of a character as well. And he says, maybe we should convert all these people by force. And this is, by the way, early 16th century. In the early 16th century, the Andalus Muslims were being really devastated, and they were forcibly being converted. And they were migrating into the Ottoman Empire. These things don't happen in a vacuum. So he wanted to retaliate, and he wanted to forcefully convert the Christians in Balkans. So if there was no rule of law, he could have just gone ahead and do it. But he opens this up in the cabinet, and the cabinet, the chief judge, says, you can't. La ikraha fid din. There's no compulsion in religion, you can't forcefully convert people. So he abandons the idea. There's another incident where Sultan Suleiman, it's actually a case where his executive order was annulled by Sheikhul Islam. Sheikhul Islam, by the way, was in the cabinet at the time. And by the way, Ottomans had a proper cabinet. There was viziers, there were like ministers, they had meetings, they were recorded, decisions were made properly. I think it's going to take a long time to explain, but it was about the Sultan Suleiman gave the rights to Grand Bazaar. Have you seen the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul? The closed ones, there's about thousands of shops. That belongs to the Hagia Sophia Waqf, the endowment. So all of the rental property comes into that endowment. It was a very rich endowment. So this was given to some rich people to rent it out. So they were making money out of that rental process. They were adding their margin. So this was, others sued about this to the Sheikhul Islam. And Sheikhul Islam looked at the case and he actually nullified Sultan's executive order, which is Ferman. When it's written and he signs it, that's it, it's law. It has to be executed. He annuls it on the basis of being illegal. And he can't do anything about it. So next one is the ethical economy and trade and craft guilds. It was an Islamic economy, there were no banks, but the capital could be collected through guilds, and these are associations, let's say blacksmiths, right? So blacksmiths had their own association, guild. So every blacksmith became a member of that. And what is really interesting about these guilds is that they developed code of conduct, like a ethical treatment of people that is based on the Islamic ethics. And even, I gave the example, like if a child could not study in madrasa, he was given to a tradesperson or craftsman. They weren't neglected because they received their education through the craftsmanship. And they had these 3 tiers of licensing. You were çırak, kalfa, usta. The word usta comes from ustaz, So apprentice, kalfa was the middle, and the usta is the master. So 10-year-old, you joined. So your master trained you not only in the knowledge and the skills of that craftsmanship, but also how to be a person, the character, how to treat customers properly, not to deceive people. All of these things were given through example and also advice. And the economy was ethical. Just to give you one example of how ethical it was. The Fatih Sultan Mehmed, they say, before the conquest of Constantinople took place, he wanted to see the state of the society, so he changed his appearance. So he went as an ordinary person he wanted to shop around. So he goes in the morning to a shop, he buys some stuff, and after he buys a little bit, the shop owner says, enough. I had my siftah. Siftah is your first sale in the morning, which was when you made it early, if it was rich, you had a good customer, you would have a good day or something like that. Because I made my siftah, my neighbor didn't do it. Can you buy the rest from him? So he goes to his neighboring shop, he buys a little bit from him as well, and he says the same thing, because my neighbor hasn't had a first sale yet. And when he saw that and the treatment that he got, the honesty of the shopkeepers, he said, not only I can conquer Constantinople, with people like this I can conquer the world. Really, that ethical aspect of society is very important. Like, we cannot, brothers and sisters, like Muslim societies in our time, don't expect somebody to come and become a leader and save us. And it's not going to happen. The leaders come from the society itself, and it's a reflection of the state of the society. If the society is not good, leaders won't be good. So the next one is spirituality and social responsibility. And when I say spirituality, with that comes importance given to knowledge, respect for religion and learning, and also refining one's character through Islam's spiritual practices, or what we call ihsan. When they say, Akşam said, the teacher of Yavuz Sultan Selim, I forgot his name, but when they were going to Egypt, on the Egypt expedition, the horse of his teacher steps on a mud, and the mud spill goes to the clothes of the sultan. So, oh my God, he's dirty. And people worry, because this is the sultan who's a little bit harsh, right? And Yavuz Sultan said, the word Yavuz means like the one go-getter. And he says, he takes off his kaftan, which is the outer garment. He goes, when I die, this mud comes from the foot of the horse of my teacher. When I die, I want this to be covered over my grave. Can you see, like, scholars were valued because of their learning. And the scholars did not, go to get the bakshish, all the money and all of that. In that they had dignity. They had dignity. They did not want to be part of their ruling. Akşemseddin, who's the teacher of Sultan Mehmed, like when Sultan Mehmed's father wanted to conquer Constantinople, he had a sheikh, Hacı Bayram Veli, who's in Ankara, buried in Ankara. I grew up in Ankara and we used to always visit that mosque, very famous mosque. And so he visits him one day, he goes, Ya Sheikh, do you think, is it nasib to me, do you think it's going to happen, conquering Constantinople? Because all the sultans, they wanted to be the hadith, there was a hadith that gave glad tidings to the one who conquered Constantinople. They wanted to be the one. And his teacher, Hacı Bayram, said, unfortunately, no, it's going to be that baby in the cradle, and he had the baby Sultan Mehmed with him, and this, my apprentice of mine. He had this small, the student, Akşemseddin. So when 20 years later, or not 20, maybe 15 years later, he was appointed as the teacher of Sultan Mehmed. So he tutored him, Akşemseddin, and he was with him all the way through the conquest. All the way. And also he's the one who discovered, through some vision, the burial site of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, the Sahaba who was buried before the walls of Constantinople. So that he finds that they dig it up, they find that the body is still not rotted away. Now there's a mosque over there. So he finds the place. So basically, he is responsible partly, largely, for the conquest. But after the conquest, he disappears. He goes to a village, becomes a village teacher. But he doesn't say, look, I have a share in this, give me some ministership and let's share power and all of that. He doesn't say that. So that kind of a respect, spirituality, importance to religion, Islamic ethics was very much important. But also that social responsibility, as in the rich people, they created waqfs. These were endowments. Basically, they donated their money they established an association, an institution, which can provide a service to something. Like there were 15,000 waqfs in Istanbul alone. 15,000. There were about 20,000 waqfs in Palestine, Jerusalem and the surroundings. 20,000 waqfs. Imagine the rest. Like, this is how the Ottomans built society, largely through the funding of the rich people. And the budget on the economic side, the income of the empire was great as well. Just to give you an idea, the budget of Sivas, which is just a city, a province, the budget of that city was greater than the budget of France. So just one city, right? So the Ottomans were superpower, much like America is today. But if you add up all of the budgets of the Muslim countries, it doesn't add up to America, unfortunately, today. So these endowments or waqfs, they provided services, all sorts of services. One of them is, for example, if a housemaid broke the dishes, they could apply for funding to replace the dishes so that the owner didn't get angry with them or cut the pay or something. That's one. There was a waqf that treated injured birds on their migration journey through Istanbul. If they were injured, and they took them, they looked after them, and then when they got better, they released them into wild. Isn't that amazing? Like, people do that today with the environmental protection. Like, Ottomans were doing this a long time ago. Like, you even see it. Like today, I don't know if you've noticed, in places, if you don't, in buildings, if they don't want birds to perch, they put these nails so that they cannot sit there. They don't want the birds because they're going to drop it and so on. What Ottomans did when they built mosques, they made little houses for birds on the facade. So the birds can go and nest and live there as well. Isn't that amazing? Like, that's such refined thinking that unfortunately Muslims, we don't have it in this day and age. So a lot of the wealth that was generated went back into society through zakat, waqfs, and many other charity and services that was provided to society. Now you could even say that the government did not, the Ottoman government did not provide schooling. It was all through waqfs. But they didn't build schools, other than some basic madrasas like big mosques. It was done through a civil service. So it was a civil society. But unfortunately, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed and a lot of the traditional Islamic civilization collapsed as well, even Cairo, like Cairo was largely a Waqf city, Istanbul, all of that was lost or nationalized by strong rulers and military presidents, things like that. So these are some of the factors that gave rise to Ottoman Empire. So from a little state, it became an empire. I just want to quickly cover the main, I already mentioned some of these names. Fatih Sultan Mehmed, he's known as Sultan of the two continents and the two seas. He conquered Constantinople. And he also famously, on one night, they took 70 ships overland in order to win the war. It was an amazing feat. And in 16th century, when Portuguese started when they entered into Indian Ocean, they stopped all Muslim trade and the Hajj trips. So Hajj could not be, Muslims could not travel for Hajj, and all Muslim shipping were stopped by Portuguese. So what they did, Sultan Selim in 1517, he does an Egypt expedition, basically captures Syria, Arabia, and Egypt. The intention was to have access to Red Sea so that they can go and fight against the Portuguese to defend Muslim interests. Again, if you look at that without the historical context, it looks like, what are they doing in Egypt? And Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, he also continued the defense of Indian Ocean, and he laid siege to Vienna. Vienna doesn't fall. Ottomans laid siege twice, unsuccessfully. Some say that if they were successful, the whole Europe would have opened. Who knows? This is a really nice book that I recommend if you're interested. I read a lot about history before this book. I thought Ottomans didn't do anything in Indian Ocean. But this book covers the Ottoman age of exploration. It really highlights a great struggle that Ottomans did in order for geopolitics of the day to gain supremacy, or at least not to lose Muslim interest in Indian Ocean. And Portuguese were the chief adversaries. And by the way, Portuguese had the Crusader mentality. Like this is in their correspondence. The idea was, we'll go through the Red Sea and conquer Jerusalem that way. So by doing the trade, we raised the money in order to do that. That was their goal. And until Ottomans entered into Indian Ocean, and this is what one of the Portuguese officials says about Ottomans. Sir, they are very dangerous men and very experienced in the ways and arts of war. They have already taken control of Mecca and the Red Sea, and if they also build a fortress in Basra, they will be able to send all the ships they possess in the other sea, meaning Mediterranean, around to this side, an eventuality which represents the greatest possible danger for all of India, or their interest in India. Actually, Ottomans wanted to build the Suez Canal. It was just too difficult with the technology of that day. And one interesting thing is that Ottomans twice proposed to Portuguese. They say, let's not fight each other. Let's make Indian Ocean a free trade zone. So you should be able to come to our port. We should be able to go to your port, controlled by you. Let's trade. Like, why are we fighting? And then it was refused twice by Portuguese, unfortunately. And as you know, after the Portuguese comes Dutch and British, and they come as Dutch is in their company, British is in their company with armies. And that is a bit of a turning point for the Muslim world. Once Muslims lost the access to Indian Ocean trade, the economy went down. And when the economy went down, everything else went down with it as well. So, the same factors that gave rise to Ottoman Empire are applicable for Muslims today. We just have to work on these. Not conquer, various territories, but focus on the leadership dedicated to a sacred vision. That is, we have to have a shared vision that we can all work towards, that is above our own selfish interests. And two, emphasis on education and meritocracy. It shouldn't be like Turks, Arabs, or this, that ethnicity. It should be Muslim identities, should come to the foreground. And we need to invest on education. And this is why ISRA, as ISRA, we are doing what we're doing. It's a humble contribution to the Islamic scholarship in this land. But we've got to start somewhere. 100 years down the track, imagine what could happen. So we start now to achieve certain things 100 years down the track. But if you don't do anything 100 years later, there could be no Muslims in this country. And three, rule of law and religious freedoms. And rule of law starts, brothers and sisters, in mosque associations and leadership. And it has to be in the boards of these Muslim organizations. We have little dictators in these organizations, unfortunately. And they don't follow rules or laws or Islamic ethics. Unfortunately, this is what happens when that person becomes a head of state. What kind of a leader is he going to be? What do you think? All of a sudden he's going to transform and he's going to be all nice and rule as well. It's not going to happen. It's going to be worse. And we need to focus on religious freedoms or freedoms. That Islam is ultimately a tolerant religion, a religion that respects other faiths, respects other people, and it brings out the humanity of people. And we need to gain that back. And for ethical economy and collectives in trade and crafts, meaning like there has to be Muslim tradesmen and businessmen, and they need to be ethical. They should be known, they should make a name for themselves as honest people. Like, when you get an electrician, Muslim electrician or a plumber, when he promises to come on Thursday, you should come on Thursday. Don't just not turn up, And spirituality and social responsibility, once again, our religion has three dimensions: beliefs, theology, practices, which is the Islamic law, and the ihsan, which is the spiritual dimension. We should never forget that. And ultimately, all of that intention, the good of intention, the honesty, all of the qualities that makes a Muslim is a product of how we are within. And inshallah, I'll leave you with that. And we'll open up for questions.